there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's good to be with you on this Tuesday, October 18th. And tonight, we're talking about the midterms.
Well, I feel a lot of the policies that have been currently installed are affecting the economy, and no one seems to care about fixing the issues.
The midterm debates continue tonight, including in Florida's Senate race. Steve Kornacki's at the big board to break down where things stand. Then,
the court got Roe right nearly 50 years ago, and I believe Congress should codify Roe once.
President Biden pledges to write Roe v. Wade into law if Democrats keep control of Congress. But voters say the economy is issue number one. A White House spokesperson tells us how the president plans to make it all work. Plus, it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Men may not pay as much attention to this as women, but we should. Aaron Gilchrist brings us the story of a man advocating for himself as he fights breast cancer. And how can companies help more women move up in the ranks? A new study explores what's getting in the way as more women quit in frustration. We'll consider how to slow a trend known as the Great Breakup. Good to see you tonight. Let's begin with the midterm elections. Election day is 3 weeks from today, but the voting is well underway. Early voting has begun for millions of Americans in these 18 states. Maybe you've already voted yourself, and candidates across the country are making their final appeals. Let's get into this race with MSNBC political analyst David Jolly. He's also a former Republican congressman from Florida. Good to see you tonight, and I wonder what your sense is of this race. I know that there are mixed opinions in terms of whether or not Marco Rubio is going to sail to re-election, whether Congresswoman Demings could knock him out of another term. How do you see the race so far?
Yeah, look, Joshua, good to be with you. The two key statewide races in Florida are the race for Senate and the re-election race of Governor Ron DeSantis against former Congressman Charlie Crist. Both Ron DeSantis and Marco Rubio go into this race with a bit of a lead. What is unique about this U.S. Senate race is Val Demings is the strongest statewide Democratic candidate. And for all of her strength, at the same time, the state of Florida is seeing her for the first time, right? Unlike Charlie Crist, that the state knows very well as a Democratic nominee, this is Val Demings' kind of coming out race. And so Val Demings tonight in the debate, but also throughout the campaign, is really pushing Marco Rubio on his specific service to the state over the last 6 years, 12 years really. But what has Marco Rubio done for the state? Marco Rubio, in turn, is saying, look, Val Demings is part of a national Democratic Party out of step with Florida voters, trying to tie Congresswoman Demings to Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Joe Biden. This is still Rubio's race, but Val Demings is the one statewide Democratic candidate that could actually take Rubio right now.
If Val Demings is the strongest candidate in Florida right now, what does that mean for Charlie Crist?
Look, as I mentioned, both Rubio and Demings have a lead to make up. Ron DeSantis has more money in his campaign war chest than any governor in Florida history and any governor in the nation right now. He has arguably the hottest hand in national politics. The interesting thing is Republicans are ready to declare Florida a red state. But even red victories, Republican victories, are only by 1, 2, 3, 4 points. Florida is still a purple state by the numbers, and Charlie Crist knows that. Charlie Crist has tried to position himself in 2022 as Joe Biden did in 2020. I'm the healer that can bring together disaffected Republicans, independents, and Democrats. Right now, he's still trailing the incumbent governor, Ron DeSantis. But look, Charlie Crist is a household name in Florida. He has a strong case to make to voters on November 8th.
Yeah, Charlie Crist has been, for those who don't know the state, has been a politician in the state of Florida for a long time, both as a Republican, as its attorney general and its governor, and then eventually as a Democrat, including as a member of Congress. But what about the issues that are going to get Floridians to cast their votes one way or another? NBC Shaquille Brewster spoke to some voters in South Florida, in Fort Lauderdale, which is Broward County, Boca Raton, which is the southern edge of Palm Beach County, and Delray Beach, the next city north. Here is some of what they told him. Watch.
I believe hugely in women's rights, LGBT rights.
Everything is so expensive now. everything.
What do you know about Rubio? What do you hear from him?
Well, it's just the party in general, and I like that. I feel like they're for America. They're for protecting us. There's not a lot of woke.
The Republicans seem to complain more, but offer no solutions.
So those voters who actually were speaking to him in Lake Worth, which is Palm Beach County, those voters expressed an array of different issues that are important to them. David, what do you think is going to drive this election? Is it just party preference, or are there bigger issues that voters are listening out for ideas on?
History would suggest that Republicans are in a favorable position. You're in the first midterm of a Democratic president. The economy is going sideways or down. Vladimir Putin is saber-rattling with nuclear war. We have these challenges. Consumer confidence is down. But the interesting thing, Joshua, is normally Republicans would have a clean environment to prosecute that case against incumbent Democrats. But in a post-Dobbs world, where people are asking the questions about reproductive rights in America, and in a world where the Republican Party is defined by Donald Trump coming out of the January 6th hearings, and an environment where Republicans are continuing to prosecute culture wars on LGBT issues and immigration and other issues of very personal rights, all of a sudden voters are faced with a real contrast. And that environment, the contrast, is how elections are ultimately decided. Which party, which candidate is going to do better for me on the economy, on gun violence prevention, on education? And in that case, Democrats have a more favorable environment than they would, than history would suggest. It is still a challenging environment, but look, this is a very important moment for Democrats. If Democrats are to prevail on November 8th, it would suggest that not only have Democrats defied history, voters have. Voters have suggested to the country, we do not want to go back to Trumpism in the Republican Party. It's a fascinating 3 weeks to go in this November 8th election.
Hey, briefly before I got to let you go, maybe the answer is not that much. It wouldn't surprise me if the answer is not that much, but how much do you think that Hurricane Ian will affect people's thought processes in terms of who they're going to vote for and how they're going to vote? I imagine that the economic and climate issues are already kind of baked into the politics right now, so I'm not sure if the hurricane changes much, but how do you see it?
Look, in the raw politics of it, it sidelined Charlie Crist for a few weeks where Ron DeSantis was on air every single day. That helps an incumbent governor. The interesting thing is what Democrats did not do over the last year that they could have done is to drag Ron DeSantis off of his playing field. And instead of fighting DeSantis on DeSantis issues, suggest that the property insurance market in Florida is collapsing. Talk about an issue where kids went back to school with 8,000 unfilled teacher positions, an economy about to collapse, an insurance and property tax crisis. That very well might inform voters to say, you know what, Ron DeSantis, as strong as he is right now, may not be the strongest candidate on the ballot in November. That's certainly what Charlie Crist is hoping for.
Yeah, I hear you on the visibility, though, in terms of Ron DeSantis just kind of being on the air every day during the recovery and continuing to be during the recovery. Former Republican Congressman David Jolly, an MSNBC political analyst, who I neglected to note earlier is no longer affiliated with the GOP, but I appreciate your affiliation with us tonight. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Joshua.
Now let's zoom out from Florida for a broader look at where the midterms stand. NBC national political correspondent Steve Kornacki has more on that from the big board. Hey, Steve.
All right, Joshua, well, let's take a look here in the home stretch. First of all, what issues are animating voters? Well, this is the New York Times poll here asking voters, what's the #1 issue on your mind? Very striking. The economy, inflation, by far towering above all the other issues. If you add those two together, the economy and inflation, that's 44%. Nearly half now who are saying it's their top issue heading into the midterm. Nothing else even cracks double digits. Notably here, abortion, an issue Democrats obviously are focusing heavily on, only at 5% here in terms of being voters' top issue. This emphasis on the economy and inflation that voters have may help explain this, the generic ballot. This is where you ask folks, Democrats, Republicans, who do you want to control Congress? This is the average of all the generic ballot polls that are out there right now, and Republicans, on average, are now leading by 2.2 points. And that's not too much, but it is a bit of a change here. A week ago, this number was less than a point. A month ago, Democrats were ahead. In the last week, we've had bad news about inflation. You've seen gas prices start to tick up again. It seems that as that focus moves more towards inflation in the economy, less from other issues, Republicans may be getting an advantage here in the generic ballot. Something else that might be helping Republicans is the issue of crime. Like abortion, it doesn't rate that highly in terms of voters' top issue, but take a look at a race where it may be having an impact. This is the race for Senate in Wisconsin. Ron Johnson, Republican incumbent, is leading his Democratic challenger in the poll average here. Here's an interesting poll that Marquette Law did in this Wisconsin Senate race. They asked about issues a different way. They basically just asked, are you concerned about this set of issues here? And you could see nearly universally folks say they're concerned about inflation. But look where crime checks in. Nearly 90%, 87% there in Wisconsin say they're concerned about crime. Johnson has been running heavily on crime, and Republicans nationally have been running heavily on crime. Meanwhile, abortion almost 10 points lower, down at 78%. Democrats been running heavily on abortion. So Johnson's got that lead in Wisconsin. He's been focusing on crime. Mandela Barnes on abortion. You could see crime may have more resonance, at least in Wisconsin and maybe in some other states, than abortion does. That's on top of inflation, where Republicans, we can see, do have an advantage. Also, by the way, this race in Georgia continues to loom large. This Senate race between Herschel Walker, Raphael Warnock. Keep in mind, Georgia, runoff state. If nobody breaks 50% here on Election Day, there will be a runoff in Georgia. December 6th, if things break a certain way, that runoff could decide control of the Senate, just like 2 years ago. Georgia could make that decision. Interesting, though, here in Georgia, this story is that in the governor's race, the Republican Brian Kemp, the incumbent, is over 50% and comfortably ahead. Herschel Walker, the Senate candidate on the Republican side, running well behind Kemp. What's going on here? Suburban voters in Georgia who don't like Biden that much, don't like Democrats that much, but also don't like Donald Trump. Well, Kemp, they are comfortable with, because Kemp went head-to-head with Donald Trump earlier this year. Trump going after him in a primary. Kemp survived. Those voters are fine with Kemp. Walker, who's very close with Trump, obviously, he's got some convincing to do with those voters. And it's why that Senate race looks very different than that governor's race.
All right. Thank you, Steve. That's NBC's Steve Kornacki at the big board. And that statistic, that poll that he put out that said that the economy was the biggest national issue, that's something we're going to talk about in just a minute as we think about abortion in America. Because President Biden says that a bill to enshrine abortion rights is job one if Democrats prevail in the midterms. A White House spokesperson explains the president's strategy. Next.
And with your support, I'll sign a law codifying Roe in January. Together, let's remember who we are. We are the United States of America.
We're 3 weeks from the midterms. Today, President Biden hit the trail with a specific campaign promise in mind: abortion rights. He urged voters to remember how they felt when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. The president pledged that if Democrats keep control of Congress, job one will be writing Roe into federal law.
That's why in these midterm elections are so critical to elect more Democratic senators to the United States Senate and more Democrats to keep control of the House of Representatives. And folks, if we do that, here's the promise I make to you and the American people. The first bill that I will send to the Congress will be to codify Roe v. Wade. And when Congress passes it, I'll sign it in January, 50 years after Roe was first decided the law of the land.
Mr. Biden accused Republicans of planning a nationwide abortion ban if they take control of Congress, and he says he would veto that.
Congressional Republicans are doubling down on their extreme positions. Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader of the House, has said that if they take control of the House, our work is, quote, far from done. If Republicans get their way with a national ban, it won't matter where you live in America. So let me be very clear. If such a bill were to pass in the next several years, I'll veto it.
Joining us now is White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary Olivia Dalton. Ms. Dalton, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thanks so much for having me, Joshua.
What was President Biden's reason for making this announcement today?
Well, look, it's been just over 100 days since the Dobbs decision, which unconscionably ripped away fundamental rights for women all across the country. Today, the president made very clear he was going to have the backs of American women. He would stand up for our daughters and make sure that our daughters don't have fewer rights than our mothers had. And he made very, very clear that if this time, in a few months from now, we have a pro-choice majority in Congress, he will make it his top legislative priority to codify Roe into law and make it the law of the land.
With regard to the president's legislative priorities, there's been polling throughout the midterm season about what voters say that they are most interested in. A New York Times CNN poll that came out today shows that only 5% of voters say that their biggest issue facing the country today is abortion. The economy and inflation, both kind of bits and pieces of the same set of issues, are far and away number one. Talk about how the administration is contemplating balancing all of these different priorities. Abortion, yes, but also for sure the economy. How does the president balance all of those needs?
Of course, and I'm so glad you asked me that question, because the president spent most of last week traveling the country talking about how he is planning to invest in infrastructure, bring down costs across the board for Americans who are suffering right now through the Inflation Reduction Act, how he is going to continue working to bring down gas prices, how he's going to strengthen Medicare and Social Security, and contrasting that with Republicans who want to do the exact opposite. Yesterday, the president talked about student debt relief. Tomorrow, he's talking about gas prices once again. And so I think you've seen that this president has put on the front burner all of these issues that Americans are talking about around the kitchen table. But of course, today, I think you can do all of those things while recognizing the tremendous threat that looms for American women across this country. Republicans have been very clear that if they have a majority next year in Congress, they're going to advance a national abortion ban. The president takes that seriously, and so do American women.
With regard to what happens if there is a Republican majority next year, obviously it's not unusual for Congress to flip the year after the term after a president is elected. That is very common. And in the poll that I cited, it also shows kind of a statistical tie in terms of who likely voters say they plan to vote for. 49% say they plan to vote for a Republican candidate in their home district at least. 45% say that they plan to vote for a Democratic candidate. That is well within the margin of error. How does the administration view the potential for a statistical toss-up in the midterms? The idea that it's kind of unclear exactly which way Congress is going to go. That's got to make policy planning for next year a little bit harder.
Well, look, I have to be very, very careful about not engaging in electoral politics from here at the White House, as you know. But the president has been very focused over the past 20 months on advancing a historic legislative agenda that, he's been out across the country over recent weeks talking about. The contrast could not be clearer. On the one hand, we have a president who's focused on delivering for the American people, whether it be bringing down the cost of energy, the cost of health care, the cost of prescription drugs, health care premiums, whether it's passing landmark infrastructure investments, whether it's standing up for women's rights. That's what President Biden is focused on. And of course, every day we see congressional Republicans are focused on doing the exact opposite, undermining a woman's right to choose, threatening national abortion bans, threatening to put Medicare and Social Security on the chopping block regularly in Congress. It's that unpopular agenda that is out of step with where the American people are. And look, they'll have choices.
I understand, and thank you for stating that there are certain things you cannot discuss. There are laws like the Hatch Act that govern the use of public dollars and government facilities for campaigning. So I respect that there is a line you can't cross. But with regard to the president's remarks today on abortion, I wonder how President Biden would deal with it if the House or the Senate did flip. I mean, the president's been able to get some enormous pieces of legislation passed in the current House and Senate, in the current Congress. Is the president's stated focus on codifying Roe dependent on Democrats being able to prevail in the midterms, or does the administration think it can still get that done even if Republicans win some victories this November?
The bottom line is the president made very clear today that if there's a pro-choice majority in the Senate, in the House, come the start of next Congress, he will make it his top legislative priority to deliver a bill to the Hill codifying Roe and protecting the rights of women across this country. I think the starkest picture that I can paint for you is that come next year, we could either see a Senate that's working to pass a national abortion ban, or we could be passing President Biden's bill codifying Roe and restoring rights to women all across this country.
I would like to ask you about a slightly different topic than this, and it just kind of has to do with the president's relationship with the press. It's an inherently adversarial relationship, but my colleague Mike Memley reported today that there's a little bit of a souring between the relationship in the White House and the press. Your colleague Kate Bedingfield told Mike that there's been kind of a fundamental disbelief in the president's strategy, particularly among what she called the D.C. East Coast press corps. Now, I don't want to make it sound like this is unique to President Biden. Just about every president has had disagreements with just about every press corps, at least since the advent of electronic media or newsreels. You know, that is not a new thing. But could you just speak to that relationship, how that is working, and how the president and the administration are trying to message on what's been done, on what the accomplishments are? I mean, does the president really believe that the D.C. press corps is getting in the way of that?
Look, the president enjoys a robust relationship with the press corps here. He has actually outpaced his predecessors in terms of informal questions from reporters every single day in and about the White House complex. So I don't think that, I genuinely do not think that the White House press corps suffers from any lack of access to the president. You've also seen him do a number of recent interviews, one-on-one interviews and sit-downs with some of your colleagues in the press corps here. So I don't think that the White House press corps is suffering from any lack of access to the president. I will also say, though, that we're very proud to be democratizing access to the White House, democratizing information, and looking at new ways of communicating with the American public. I understand sometimes that comes with a little chafage with our friends in the press corps here. We experienced that during the Obama administration, too, when President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama looked for different ways to communicate with the public that was consuming media in different ways. And so we're looking to do that here. Your colleague also scooped that the president will be appearing on the podcast Smartless coming up in just a few days here. So, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunity for the public to hear from the president.
Before I let you go, just to follow on that, I have to say, you know, I am part of the press corps, but I do think that it makes sense in the 21st century to talk to all kinds of people in all kinds of ways. So I can't really blame the administration for going through less than official channels. Before I let you go, I wonder how the administration deals with the influence of some of those unusual or unconventional sources, like the Joe Rogans of the world, like the Ben Shapiros of the world, the Tucker Carlsons of the world. Everyone's not just listening to the White House press corps. Does that make the job of communicating the agenda harder because you have these kind of new influencers that are affecting voters in ways you can't get at with the press corps?
Sure, and I think some of your colleagues have also noted this as well. We've really looked to, like I said, democratize access to this White House and to information. We've hosted content creators and folks with presences on social media platforms here at the White House. NPR just did a wonderful story covering some of these folks and how they're sharing information with their audiences about the work that we do here. So we're always looking for new ways to communicate with the public as we realize as you just noted, the media landscape is increasingly fragmented, and it's our job to figure out how we communicate what the president is focused on, what the White House is working on to the American people. That's fundamentally our job.
White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary Olivia Dalton. If the president ever wants to, we're a very non-traditional program. My round wooden table is welcome to him anytime, and to you as well, and I appreciate you making time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joshua. I really appreciate it.
We will get to some of today's other top stories in just a moment, including a big shift coming to California's COVID policy, the story of one man's battle with breast cancer, and a defeat for the effort to unionize Amazon's warehouses. Tonight's headlines begin with COVID in California. That state is preparing to phase out its state of emergency by the end of February. Officials hope the timeline will keep California safe from any possible winter surges. A statement from Governor Gavin Newsom calls that state of emergency effective and necessary, but he says that created measures and operations that will continue to protect Californians, making the state of emergency unnecessary going forward. California made this declaration at the start of the pandemic. It expedited materials like personal protective equipment, as well as setting up testing and vaccination centers. During that time, the state says it administered around 81 million vaccine doses. It also distributed 1 billion pieces of PPE and processed 186 million COVID tests. October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Generations of women have talked about it and screened for it throughout their lives. Far fewer men probably give it a thought. But maybe we should. We're definitely not immune. One man told us his story of fighting breast cancer. Here's NBC's Aaron Gilchrist.
For Andre Martins, it was just another day at the gym.
I had a big vacation planned, beach vacation.
But days after lifting weights, he was still feeling the burn, even when the normal muscle ache should have been gone.
I noticed, though, something was different on my left side. I had the soreness.
First, Andre thought something was wrong with his heart.
After a few tests, they told him, hey, go home, go eat a burger. You are in very good health. I went to have a physical. Again, the doctor cleared me, like, you great health, go live your life.
Then, late one night, something woke Andre from his sleep.
I started poking myself so deep to try to find something, and I found a lump deep within the skin in my chest area.
So you went to a friend of yours who's a nurse?
She sent me to a mammogram, and then the mammogram showed something that needed to be further looked at. And a few days later, I had a biopsy, and the biopsy confirmed that I had breast cancer.
This was the small tumor that we found in Andre's breast.
Dr. Ruth Oretz is a medical oncologist at NYU Langone Perlmutter Cancer Center. She helped treat Andre and guide him through his cancer battle.
Andre's breast cancer is really how we see men present. They feel something abnormal in the breast. Maybe there's a little swelling or a lump. In Andre's case, he really acted on it. He didn't ignore that symptom.
About 1 in 833 men develops breast cancer in his lifetime, according to the Breast Cancer Research Foundation. Compared to women, that is rare. 1 in 8 women is diagnosed in her lifetime. A recent study from Vanderbilt University shows that male breast cancer patients have a 19% higher mortality rate than female patients. And that might be because most men catch it late.
Pay attention to your own body. Don't be ashamed or shy to go and ask for someone to check something out if you think it looks weird on your breast or even under the arm if there's a swelling.
Andre caught it early, stage 1A. He went through surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, and is now going through hormone therapy. But for the first time since his diagnosis, Andre can say he is cancer-free.
What do you want other men to know? Like you said, this is not something that I don't think any of us really think about.
Think about yourself as your own car. When a warning light comes on or your tire is deflated in your car, usually you are not going to ignore it. So if you feel something, get checked. It could save your life. It definitely has saved my life.
Aaron Gilchrist joins us now, and I think the piece of your piece that I take away from that is that Andre was able to survive this because he caught it early and because he didn't do what a lot of guys do, which is like, I'll do it later. He bounced on it and did something about it.
100%. He knew something wasn't right, and he said, let me check on this. And when somebody said to him, no, you're fine, he was like, nope, let me check it with somebody else. And he was very persistent about figuring out what was causing this discomfort and the eventual lump that he found.
I wonder how much of this is not so much medical but cultural. I mean, even the idea of, let's be real, of guys thinking of this as their breasts rather than their pecs, right? Like, it's a guy thing about this part of the body. And I think there's a body image thing there. There's a cultural conversation thing there that I think chauvinism gets in the way of, and we just won't talk about it.
You're 100% right. I think Andre said that he waited, once he found out he had breast cancer, he waited, I think, at least a week before he told anybody in his family that he had breast cancer, because partly he just had a hard time saying, I have breast cancer as a man. The reality is we do have breast tissue. Men do have breast tissue. Obviously, it's not an area that's developed in the way that women develop, and so we don't think about that part of our body as having that breast tissue. It's there. It can become malignant in some cases, and you find out you do have cancer in that area. You don't have to call it that if you don't want to, but that's what it is. You know, do something about it if you find it.
While our piece was running, I kid you not, I got a text from my mom who said that she has a friend, a male friend, who had breast cancer. And it just makes me wonder how many more people are touched by this, or just don't know that someone in their circle is touched by this. Did anybody you talked to have any thoughts on how to get people to talk more about this? Just how to get men to know what to notice and what to say?
So the oncologist we talked to, Dr. Oratz, didn't really get into that, but she did say that it's a conversation that is worth having. It's worth sort of cutting through the stigma and the machismo that's often involved with this sort of a topic, and thinking, all right, well, men need to know your cancer history in your family. You need to know your medical history. You need to know about breast cancer in particular, because that can be something that can be a part of increasing your risk even for men.
Yeah, especially if you have a cancer history, because cancers can metastasize, cancers can run in the family. Just another conversation worth having. Thank you, Aaron. This is fascinating. Hopefully more people will start talking about this. It's NBC's Aaron Gilchrist. Remember, you can catch Aaron and Kate Snow every weekday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern right here on NBC News Now. Workers at an Amazon warehouse in Albany, New York have voted not to unionize. Today we learned that about 2/3 of workers there voted it down. But how did Amazon and its employees get to this point? Let's look back with NBC's Tom Costello.
Today, another Amazon warehouse is voting not to unionize. The warehouse near Albany, New York employs nearly 800 people.
We're definitely going to continue to demand for the changes that are necessary.
A spokesperson from Amazon tells NBC News in part, quote, "We're glad that our team in Albany was able to have their voices heard.
We're all in this together."
Amazon has been grappling with union efforts for more than a year. In February of 2021, formal union activity began at the Bessemer, Alabama warehouse. That unionization effort was eventually defeated. In April of this year, Amazon workers in Staten Island successfully voted to unionize the first warehouse in the U.S.
Today, we made history.
On May 2nd, a different Staten Island warehouse rejected a union bid. This Amazon union activity, part of a larger labor movement occurring across the country.
Seattle is a union town.
Organizing efforts have been ongoing at coffee giant Starbucks stores since 2021. Now, with at least 240 of its stores in the U.S. unionizing, pushing for higher wages and better employee benefits. Days ago, tech giant Apple saw its second retail store's employees vote to unionize as well. The latest union fights, big box retailers, Lowe's and Home Depot employees petitioning to form what would be their respective companies' first unions. Union activity on the rise, with the National Labor Relations Board seeing a sharp increase in election petitions, up 53% over the last year. And the latest Gallup poll shows 71% of Americans now approve of labor unions.
That's NBC's Tom Costello reporting. Millions of Americans are getting an early winter, maybe you too. Snow is falling hard in Michigan's Upper Peninsula near the Canadian border. NBC's Maggie Vespa is in Negaunee, Michigan.
In a year thus far largely defined by record heat, now we're talking about this early wintry blast affecting millions across the country more than 2 months before the season officially starts. Millions under cold weather alerts today, with states across the country being dealt an early taste of winter. Is any part of this painful, given that we're like mid-October?
It's going to be a long winter.
More than a foot of snow has fallen in northern Wisconsin, and today thousands were without power in Michigan. The cold front moving south to dump snow in places like Kentucky and creating treacherous roads in Indiana. In South Carolina, farmers are scrambling to harvest their crops.
It isn't fun to lose crops, you know, it's just a source of income, but it also signals like a change of pace.
Alabama and Mississippi set to feel colder than Boston this week, with Florida bracing for its first fall temperatures while still reeling from the devastation caused by Hurricane Ian. Americans cranking up the heat as heating bills are expected to hit a 10-year high. Even Halloween witches already looking a little frosty this year.
What if it looks like this when you're trick-or-treating?
I'm going to freeze my butt off.
And here in the Upper Peninsula, the timing of this storm is also crucial when it comes to the damage. Utility crews are reportedly finding a lot of downed trees that hadn't shed their leaves yet, meaning they were likely toppled by snow because this early in fall, they're that much heavier. Back to you.
Thank you, Maggie. That's NBC's Maggie Vespa reporting from Negaunee, Michigan. Those are some of the stories stateside that are making news, but we'll get to two big international stories next. China's president wants a third term in power, and thousands of Chinese leaders appear ready to make that happen. Plus, Russia continues attacking Ukraine's infrastructure. What will that mean when winter comes? The latest from Kyiv is just ahead. Stay close. China is the world's second largest economy. Today, its third quarter GDP report was due for release, but it has yet to publish that. Beijing made the unusual move of delaying information on gross domestic product indefinitely. It's also putting off reports on retail sales and housing prices and industrial production. No word so far on when those might come out. Meanwhile, China's holding the Communist Party's National Congress this week. It happens once every 5 years. Thousands of delegates get together to decide policy and choose the leadership for the next term. At the end of the meeting, President Xi Jinping is widely expected to get an unprecedented third term. In Ukraine, Russian attacks targeted infrastructure facilities across the country. Now, some areas have no running water or power, and that's prompting new concerns about what these attacks will mean when winter comes. NBC's Cal Perry has an update from Kyiv.
A new chapter in what is an old strategy by Russian forces to try to hit the civilian population and make it difficult, if not impossible, to live in these cities. And that's what we're seeing playing out here in the capital of Kyiv. You can see it is almost entirely dark behind me, really for two reasons. The first, people are in fear and living in fear of these airstrikes that we have seen continue over the past 8 days. The second reason is to conserve power. Just a few minutes ago, the president of Ukraine coming out and telling people that there is indeed an energy crisis unfolding in the country, and he's expecting people to conserve energy, and that is why this city is dark behind me. What we have seen play out is a wave of bombings and drones heading for Ukrainian cities. Today, in the capital, at least 3 people were killed, 4 others wounded, as again, it was the energy infrastructure targeted by Russian forces. Today, it was rockets. Yesterday, it was drones, and the death toll has risen from yesterday. 5 people were killed in the capital yesterday alone. And as I said, it's what we're seeing play out across the country. In the southern city of Mykolaiv, we saw overnight shelling there, an entire apartment building collapsing, at least 1 person found there in that rubble. And it is these ongoing strikes that have people here worried, because this was a city in many ways here in Kyiv where life was returning to normal. People were coming back to the capital. The front, where the war was to the east and to the south. Now, the front has returned to Kyiv, and it is exactly what we expect Vladimir Putin wants, to again make it difficult for the people of the city, especially as winter approaches.
That's NBC's Cal Perry reporting from Kyiv. You've probably heard about the Great Resignation, people across America leaving their jobs in hopes of greener pastures. Well, now more women are demanding much more from their jobs, and that is leaving big holes in middle management. More on the Great Breakup before we go. The Great Resignation is revealing a lot about how American workers feel today, maybe including you. One revelation, many women are done being overworked and underpaid. Now some researchers are giving that trend a different name, the Great Breakup. A new study from leanin.org and McKinsey explores what working women say they want in terms of opportunity, flexibility, and diversity. And those workers are clearly not shy about quitting their jobs to find it. The study shows a stubborn lack of equal advancement in corporate America. For every 100 men promoted from entry-level to managerial jobs, only 87 women are promoted. Right now, roughly 60% of managers are men and 40% are women. So, for every 2 women in management, there are approximately 3 men. Some companies are losing women in leadership at alarming rates. According to the report, for every 1 woman director who gets promoted, 2 leave their company. Joining us now is Daniela Pierre-Bravo, reporter for Morning Joe on MSNBC. Her latest book is called The Other: How to Own Your Power at Work as a Woman of Color. Daniela, what exactly is this great breakup? There have been songs forever talking about leaving your job. There was a song in the 70s called Take This Job and Shove It. So when we say the great breakup, what do we mean?
Yeah, I mean, it started with the Great Resignation, and Lean In and McKinsey came out with this report, of which I wrote for Mika's Know Your Value page. The great breakup is basically women in leadership roles that are asking for more. And when they're not getting it, they're breaking up with their companies. They're not leaving the workplace altogether, but they're going elsewhere to find it.
Breakup sounds a little different than just resignation.
Right.
You know, you can be resigned in a bad relationship. When you break up, you've kind of made a personal lifestyle choice about what you will and won't put up with. That feels like a much bigger decision set.
Well, it's because the values don't align. They're going into these places, these corporations, these companies where they're being asked to do more and they're not being compensated. One of the things that really struck me about this report, which is the same research that I found when I wrote my book and in the research that I do for Know Your Value, is that women by and large, for example, are being asked to do more DEI work than men.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And they're not being compensated for it. 40% of the women that were researched or that were surveyed for this report said that there's no sort of method or metric that goes into how much they're putting into DEI work in their actual performance review. So they're just sick of doing work that is not being compensated.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I think a lot of us came up feeling like we want to be go-getters, you want to do a little extra, arrive early, stay late, do whatever you're asked to do, so that you can show that you're the kind of person that a company wants to promote. And I feel like that's still good guidance generally, but there's a line, and we're kind of butting up to where that line is now, right?
Right, and I actually wrote about that in my book, The Other, where the same rules that gave us success at the beginning of our workplace, you know, put your head down, do the work, be overly grateful. It might work in year 1 or 2, but as you go up the ladder, those same rules don't apply towards going further up. But the thing here I think that is really important to know is with women in leadership, they're seeing the numbers and representation, they're more dire than ever. And that's why women are leading their companies in larger numbers than men in leadership roles.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the study, 1 in 4 C-suite leaders, CEOs, COOs, CFOs, and so on, is a woman, identifies as a woman. 1 in 20 C-suite leaders is a woman of color. So 1 in 20. So the stats are not very distributed compared to the population at the very least. So I'm guessing, I wonder if these women in the workforce who are having this great breakup are finding something better to attach to, or are many of these women still kind of searching for what they need?
Yeah, I think context matters here. I mean, I think that by and large, women are unsatisfied with the sort of current corporate America model. And, you know, we saw that a lot of women are going out and starting their own thing. I think about Latinas, right? Latinas lag and have always lagged the farthest on equal pay. This year, it's gotten even worse, 49 cents to a dollar of a white man. And you see that Latinas are also part of the cohort that is the biggest expanding entrepreneurs in this country. There's about 2 million Latina entrepreneurs in this country. And so we're seeing that if they're not getting their value back from their companies, they're either breaking up with them, going elsewhere, or starting something on their own.
Can we just underscore the stat you just mentioned? So Latino women in the U.S., by and large, are literally making half of what white men make for the same work.
49 cents to a white man man, non-Hispanic's dollar, or a white man, non-Hispanic. I just have to say, though, when I wrote this book, which I wrote it about a year ago, it's outdated. When I wrote the book, Latinas made 53 cents for every white man's dollar. And this year, it's 49 cents, as you mentioned. Our equal pay day is December 8th. So we went from being in October to going to December 8th. It takes us almost a year to make what a white man makes. So you can see that it's not just the inequities, the microaggressions, the slights that happen at work, but it's the real money that is being lost at the table when these women stay at these companies that are just not given the value back.
So what do we do about this? I mean, I feel like a lot of the things that were listed in this report are things that everybody would want at work, you know, having an inclusive environment, a place that focuses on building an inclusive culture, giving people the opportunity to make mistakes and learn and reconcile and try again, and chances for advancement. Separate the things that I think every business needs to do as we try to sort of unsuck the workplace of 2022 with the things that are more specific to women in the workplace.
Well, one of the things that this report points out is the role of managers. It's hard being a manager right now because of everything that's going on with remote work. But a lot of these women that were surveyed in this report actually say how dissatisfied they are with the metrics that their managers use and the lack of support from their manager. So I think we start there. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting that this report actually gives as advice is to incentivize managers on how they manage, which I think is a great place to start.
Are there certain aspects? I feel like the biggest failure of management at just about every company is listening. You know, if you try to talk to people, talk to women in your company and say, what do you need, what's going on? And you listen, but you don't believe them, you don't act on what you heard, you don't follow up, you don't validate, well, then it was performance art. Like, why even ask if you're not actually going to believe women who come to you and say, hey, there's a need that needs to be met?
Yeah, and the reality is that most people who are managers in this country aren't actually trained to be managers. The other thing that you bring up is a really good point, is the listening part. And I think for women of color, it's even more important because you get into these places where, for example, these nuances of discrediting happen every day in very slight ways. So when you're raising your hand and you give an idea and somebody takes credit for it, a manager should probably, step in and regurgitate what you just said, right? Or the microaggressions that happens and the role that the manager has in working towards kind of dismantling that bias that's happening. So we can talk about this forever, I feel, and I wrote a whole book about this, but it happens in such nuanced ways. But management has a lot to do here with solving the problem.
I think that one that you just mentioned at the end in terms of affirming and validating the ideas of the women on your team, just repeating them so that the person who said it knows that you heard them, I think that's a good place to start. Daniela Pierre Bravo, appreciate you talking this through with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And hey, thank you for making time for us. I would love to know your thoughts on this study or on men facing breast cancer or the midterms or anything we covered tonight. You can always find us at NBC Now Tonight on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. You can leave us a brief but brilliant voicemail, 888-575-2NBC. That's 888-575-2622, or email us nowtonight@nbcnews.com. So until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. We'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.